Good afternoon. This presentation is an attempt to move our discussion of sustainable development in a direction that incorporates some of the existing frameworks in the community development literature, and we're going to apply this to thinking about city development. So what we're going to do is start off by thinking about what sustainability is in general. We'll then review what's called the community capitals framework. I'll then try to integrate the community capitals with what are called the 3 E's of sustainability. I'll then present something called the sustainable capitals pyramid, and then we'll apply that to evaluating city development. So sustainability is one of those terms that many people think of as a buzzword, has a lot of different meanings. I like Edwards' definition from his book, The Sustainability Revolution, where he says there's basically 3 different E's involved: the economy, the environment, and equity in society, or social justice. And he also throws in another one, education. But essentially the overlap of the 3 E's is where sustainability resides, and this is consistent with most of the previous and initial conceptualizations of the concept. The Bruntland Report was one of the first put out by the international community in thinking about development, and of course what it contributed was a time feature in terms of thinking about future generations. And while this is an important aspect of sustainability, it's not the one I'm going to be focusing on here, but of course this is where we got the language about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So now we shift from sustainability to the notion of community capitals, which is a widely used framework in rural sociology and in community sociology and community development studies, which is more interdisciplinary. And this was developed by Cornelia and Jan Flora and has been through different iterations, and different versions of this are offered by such scholars as Gary Green, who also collaborates with the Floras. But basically the idea was to come up with a holistic framework for thinking about community development. And although sustainability was not the organizing framework for the community capitals, it does lend itself to that. Certainly the Floras were concerned with sustainability, but they never really offered the framework as a measure of sustainability. So the current specification is not emphasizing higher and lower order functions of the capitals in the way that the pyramid I'm going to present does either. So this is from Flora and Emory, which is like a cloud of capitals. We have 7 different types, including the built, natural, cultural, human, social, political, and of course financial capital. This diagram is from Flora and Emory, but it's based on the initial conceptualization in Flora and Flora. And what strikes me about this is, though, while it's a useful way to just kind of introduce all of the capitals, it doesn't really take you anywhere theoretically in terms of thinking about how the capitals relate to one another. So if we integrate the community capitals framework with the 3 E's, I would argue that the environment, or the first E, or ecology if you prefer, is related to 2 of the capitals. The first, of course, natural capital, is the obvious connection, which they define as those assets that abide in a particular location that include weather, geographic isolation, natural resources, amenities, and natural beauty. And of course natural capital shapes cultural capital and is connected to place. There's a lot of research supporting those connections. We can also add built capital to the environment dimension. This includes all the infrastructure that supports the other capitals that we're going to discuss. The second E of sustainability, the economy, has to do with 2 things here. I think financial capital is the obvious connection. They're defined as resources available to invest in community capacity building, to underwrite the development of businesses, to support civic and social entrepreneurship, and to accumulate wealth for future community development. I think also related to the economy is political capital. After all, political decisions have to do with decisions about resource distribution and allocation, making it fundamentally tied to the economy. And they define it as access to power organizations, and connections to resources and power brokers, or people who influence the flow of resources. Political capital also refers to the ability of people to find their own voice and engage in actions that contribute to the well-beings of their community, and therefore you can translate that into the ability of people to have a say on the distribution of resources. And finally, we get to the third E, which has to do with equity and society, social justice, those types of issues. And there I think the other three capitals come in: human capital, cultural capital, and social capital. Human capital has to do with skills and abilities that people possess and enhance their resources and access to outside resources, as well as bodies of knowledge that increase their understanding, identify promising practices, and access to data for community building. Human capital, as they define it, addresses leadership's ability to lead across differences, which is important to equity concerns, to focus on assets, to be inclusive and participatory, and act proactively in shaping the future of the community or group. Cultural capital also is related to equity in terms of the way people know the world. For instance, some cultures have a built-in understanding of inequality that kind of normalizes that inequality, while other cultures question that and are more inclusive and don't legitimate systems of inequality. So cultural capital influences what voices are heard and listened to, which voices have influence, and in what ways, also related to creativity, innovation, and influence. And of course, hegemony privileges the cultural capital of dominant groups, which is going to be an important concept in thinking about equity issues. And finally, social capital has to do with connections people have. Of course, power is important there in equity issues in terms of who's connected to who. Social capital is the glue to make things positive or negative happen. And bonding social capital is one version of this. Bonding has to do with sameness or closeness related to people who are internal to the system, while bridging has to do with people who are connected across different systems or organizations or communities. And of course, the flora and flora idea is that we want to balance bridging and bonding social capital to create entrepreneurial social infrastructure, which is a special configuration that gives rise to collective action, which is what a lot of people are interested in their study of social capital. So now I'm going to move on from looking at the community capitals framework and sustainability to what I think is a more sensible arrangement of the capitals in a pyramid format. So the goal is to synthesize the community capital framework with sustainability ideas, and I draw heavily here from the logic of Maslow's hierarchy in terms of a layering of functional needs. Just as individuals have basic and higher order needs, I would argue that communities also have basic and higher order needs and functions, and that's true of both rural and urban communities. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy, we're thinking about the development of individuals. Of course, lower order needs are those that are physiological. If people don't have basic needs met, they can't really function. So breathing, food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis, and excretion are the physiological basics. And on top of that, once those needs are met, safety needs come into play: the security of the body, of employment, of resources, morality, the family, basic social institutions. And from there, the needs get more complex, such as love and belonging, friendship, family, sexual intimacy. And then we get into more social psychological factors like self-esteem, confidence, achievement, respect of others, respect by others. And then the ultimate of that, self-actualization, which is morality, creativity, problem solving, lack of prejudice, and so on. So this is a hierarchical ordering of needs and functions of individual development, and one should not construe this as a linear process. Of course, even self-actualized people can revert back to just basic physiological needs Say if a less developed country were to experience a revolution where the existing government structure were shattered and all forms of policing were removed and chaos broke out and rioting and looting ensued, essentially that could be interpreted as people reverting backwards in this pyramid. And so this is the basic logic that I'm going to transfer over to thinking about communities in the arrangement of a sustainable capital's pyramid. Here I would argue that the environmental capitals, the natural and built, belong at the bottom. This is where the possibility of community and social life emerges. Without a livable environment, there can be no community, and that's true in both the natural and built sense. The natural environment, of course, provides basics like water and air and the basic requirements for food to keep people alive. And the built environment develops systems that make use of the natural environment. And then moving up the pyramid, we get into the political and economic forms of capital and the related systems there that make social life possible by coming up with systems of resource use and distribution. And then on the penultimate of that, the peak of this, is the human, social, and cultural capitals, which is where social life is not just happening, but it actually has a purpose. Social life is, at this stage, desirable and fulfilling in some way. And, so you can see a parallel to Maslow's hierarchy in this, that we're going beyond just basic functioning existence onto more meaningful, cultural, creative sort of higher order, higher functioning. And as is also the case with Maslow's hierarchy, we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that this is linear in one way. And of course, communities can go backwards also. The human society, human, social, and cultural capitals can be undermined. Political and economic systems can be turned upside down. And the built or natural environments can be undermined as well, which kind of pulls the rug out from the whole system. And so I think this hierarchical ordering makes better sense than a simple cloud of capitals as currently conceived in the community capitals framework. And I think the community capitals add something to the existing sustainability rhetoric that we have. So now we can turn our focus to evaluating city development. How do we develop, or how do we evaluate the development of a city with regard to sustainable capitals that are used as measurables? So basic city development, we can think of starting from the bottom and developing upward using that kind of pyramid logic. The environmental foundation is the beginning. The political and economic center is built on top of that. And from those systems, human, social, and cultural peak is developed. In turn, the influence flows back down the pyramid. The emergence of the human, social, and cultural development will act back on the political and economic systems as well as the built and natural foundations so that they reflect human, social, and cultural capital. So the built environment, in other words, begins to reflect the culture, the connectedness, the level of health, the level of education of the population. And the political and economic systems will impact the environmental foundation also. So if we kind of take this a piece at a time, we could start by thinking about city development in terms of the natural environmental foundation, an assessment of just the basic environmental systems of the air or atmosphere, the land and lithosphere, the water and hydrosphere. And then we can also look at animals and plants, the biota, the biosphere, of which humans belong, but also are reasonably thought of as consisting of a separate sphere, the human or social sphere. And of course, energy is an important component to the natural environmental considerations. The built environment is related to those natural systems in terms of systems that regulate air quality standards and the related technologies there. If we think of solid and hazardous waste disposal, those are related to the land. If we think of water filtration and treatment, those are related to the water system. If we think of habitat encroachment In the expansion of cities, this is related to biota. And if we think of housing, transportation, communication, and emergency services, those are related to the social sphere, the human sphere. And of course, electricity production and service is related to energy, which of course is related to the natural environment as well. If we move up the pyramid to the political and economic level, we start thinking about ensuring that the natural and built environmental foundations are not ruined, while also providing the resources necessary to support the development of human, social, and cultural capital. So in other words, there's a very kind of functional utilitarian view of political and economic capital as a means to an end. And of course, the pyramid, the way I've presented it, presents the development of human, social, and cultural capital as the end, and the environmental and political and economic capitals are simply a means to that end. So we finally get to the peak, the human development. Here we can practically think about systems where there's equitable access to schools and healthcare, and the goal, of course, is to create an educated and healthy city. We could think about the social in terms of creating equitable internal and external social networks, inclusive and broad, and also bridging across systems and organizations. In other words, creating a socially connected city is going to make it more equitable. And in terms of culture, we can think about equitable access to the symbolic universe from multiple and diverse groups, resisting hegemony of any single group. And of course, the goal there is to create an enlightened, creative, and innovative city. So in conclusion, city development takes place on top of environmental foundations that are both natural and built. The political and economic capitals function to maintain that foundation while also supporting the peak. And the peak involves the human, social, and cultural capital that are the most important elements of a community, whether urban or rural, and depend on the environmental as well as the political and economic capitals to exist. So the sustainable capitals pyramid, as it's been presented, can be compared to Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a cumulative hierarchy. The lower order needs must be met or the whole structure is threatened. The higher order peak reminds us of the difference between the means and the ends of social life, that material existence is the beginning and not the end of a community, and that the goal is ultimately to enhance political, social, and human capital. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please contact me. Here's my information.